So, the entertainment industry seems to live up to its name, doesn't it? I mean, you give everybody just this sense of mindless entertainment, a means of escape from reality. You got your drama, you got your action, you got your horror, you want to scare somebody, you want to evoke emotions out of them. Oh, but artists have no place in this world where you have characters, settings, and themes. Oh, wait a minute, maybe they do. And I'm going to show you just exactly what I mean. Probably shouldn't have stated it like that, but whatever. So, first off, this is one of the most obvious ones. We have film. A lot of stuff in films. I'm not really a big of a film guy, but there are plenty that I love. And one of my favorite films is Pixar, one of my favorite film companies. And one of my personal favorite trilogies of all time is Toy Story. Likewise, we got the sequel. So basically, the reason that this is an example of an art is because, not only because of creative setup, not only because of the idea behind it, but there's actually a very unique message in all this. You see, in this installment, Woody essentially is suffering through what is essentially the equivalent of a midlife crisis. Because Andy rips him in this scene. And Woody gets put on the top shelf. He finds an old toy who also got put there because he broke. And then he starts wondering what's the point in delaying the fact that every child is eventually going to outgrow his toy, whether it be because he's broken or because he gets old. And he's starting to wonder what he can do to prevent that. And he ends up being kidnapped by a toy company guy, a guy who owns a toy store. And he meets these two other toys, and what he finds out is that he essentially was a part of an old-style Western TV show that was such a big hit phenomenon back in his day. And he pretty much goes through this entire journey of whether or not he should go back to Andy and live a finite life, or be adored by children behind glass for generations. Well, after he meets one of the toys, Jessie, he starts to decide that maybe he should stay with them because Jessie was abandoned by her owner because she outgrew her. And he doesn't want to be going through that torture. But he ultimately decides, because Buzz and all the others rescue him, and they decide that, they try to tell him that you only are truly living as a toy when you're being loved and played with. So he decides that he'll go back to Andy. And what this ultimately is sort of a metaphor for when a child outgrows their parents, because, at least in the presence of Andy, Woody is essentially a father figure, because he's not known to have a dad of his own, and you can tell that he's dressing up the way Woody is. He really adores the toy, even after in the first movie where he got a cool space toy. And it's sort of a metaphor for when a parent has to deal with the fact that their child is going to outgrow them and is going to have to move on, but they'll make it last. And that's pretty much why it's such a good example of art and film. And then, of course, you move on to television shows. There's all sorts of genres in this place especially. And I'm not a really big fan of a lot of live-action TV shows, but one of my favorites is a comedy called Community. Now, it seems to be just every other sitcom, doesn't it? You just got a group of community college students who all want different things out of life. Well, there's a lot more to it than that. Community seems to be a sort of a satire on that, because the main character is essentially a womanizer, and he's also a bit of a cheat. He thought he could just cheat his way through because he faked his bachelor's degree. But he was also revealed to be a good lawyer. He has a heart, but he was abandoned. His father abandoned him as a child. He never had a lot of close friends, and that's where all these guys come in. You have the Indian kid who's obsessed with TV and movies named Abed. You have Troy. Who's like the really crazy former high school jock, who's like, it's like he's really quirky. He says some of the weirdest stuff. And then you have the old guy who was the sort of the heir to a moist towelette empire, who wants more out of life and just feels empty because he's had everything given to him on a silver platter. Been going to that school for over a decade. You have the lovely Christian woman who's like a family woman and all that, but she's also really rough around the edges. She's really tough. And then you have the former anarchist who's also a screw-up and a bit of a ditz. Not stupid, just needlessly defiant. And then you have the A student who was a pill addict in high school. And then there's their Spanish teacher for the first season, who's just beyond crazy. But what makes this show so great is because it's a subversion. It makes fun of typical sitcom scenarios. You have a paintball. You have basically a paintball episode that makes fun of a fistful of dollars and a few dollars more, and then goes into a Star Wars scenario, something they're fully aware of. And you have a Christmas episode in the second season where all of the stop-motion animation was just sort of a psychic installation, a mechanism that Abed used to escape the fact that his mother moved on past his of family who she divorced from, and it was like really heartwarming. Not only does it teach such unique morals, it provides that sense of the fact that this study group is a family, and it gives you a sense of literally community. That's pretty much why it's a good show. And then, of course, we get into territory that you wouldn't expect to find anything artistic. At least not often, because you got comic books, you got your superheroes, you got your Bang Boom Pow, Superman, Laser Blast, all that cheesy stuff. You wouldn't expect anything serious, especially with the oversaturation of dark and brooding. Well, I think we should go back to when that was actually significant. One of my personal favorite comic books is The Dark Knight Returns by Frank Miller. And there's just something about the execution of this that makes it one of the most successful dark and brooding Batman stories to ever come out. Bruce Wayne, what happens to Batman is that he gets out of retirement after being retired for 10 years because of the death of Jason Todd, who was one of the former Robins. This is considered an alternate continuity nowadays, but you get that real sense of how in the very first few pages, Batman sort of just makes it clear, Bruce Wayne makes it clear that you have the scorching heat, which is actually a representation of Batman's mind because things are heating up after his retirement. You have all these despicable crimes. And then you have a panel here where this is where his parents died, and then all of a sudden he's about to be mugged, almost like his parents were. And then things just start getting worse from there. The temperature starts rising, it gets over to 100, there's no relief in sight. And Frank Miller seems to have this very expressive style about him, not only just in his writing, the oversaturation of inner monologues to really get you into the character's mind, but just the roughness of the art style. And then you get all these explicit topics that you normally wouldn't find in a Batman story. Like, they even have a scene where a guy shoots out a porn theater. You know, stuff like that. And then they even have a recreation of when Bruce Wayne first found the tunnel with all the bats, which eventually became the Batcave. And then you cut back to when, in the present day, where everything is covered up. He shields himself from that past. But then he watches the TV one day. He finds out that they're playing the movie that he watched right the night his parents died. And then it just keeps getting worse from there because he starts flipping the channels and he starts seeing all of these different crimes that people have been committing. And so he finally decides that it's time to break out the Batman. It's time to come out of retirement. And that's actually symbolized further in the weather because a storm is coming. Not just for the criminals in Gotham, but just for Gotham as a whole. Because you then start going through all these different crimes. You have people who are committing crimes supposedly in honor of Batman. And then you have the dump. Human waste, essentially, this gang called the Mutants who commit very, very vile acts. And then the minute that Batman takes out the mutant leader, there's then a vigilante group called the Sons of Batman, which are sort of like the extremist religious group that would just commit very violent acts in the name of justice, vigilante justice. So likewise, you get a lot of political debate about whether or not Batman is actually helping crime, or if he's actually causing more crime to show up because of his presence, escalation sort of thing. And then, of course, you have that epic moment where he decides he's had enough of what the Joker's been doing over the years, but he doesn't actually kill him. He still can't bring himself to kill him, so the Joker decides he'll just kill himself after he's been paralyzed and try and get the Dark Knight to be hunted for this. And all of the stuff ends up escalating to when a nuclear weapon in Russia ends up causing a blackout that causes everyone to riot. 1 minute.
Oh.
And then you have The Long Halloween, which is my personal favorite. There's really not much to talk about this one other than the fact that it's pretty much what inspired Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight, at least that specific installment. You have the constant iteration of I believe in Gotham City, I believe in Jim Gordon, all these things that they believe in. You get the origin story of how Harvey Dent became Two-Face, and how he has this gray morality about him that just seems to suggest that he's not the pure ideology that Batman represents, escalating to when he kills the crime boss Falcone in cold blood, and recites the exact same thing he said when his nephew was shot by this murderer known as Holiday, who essentially goes around killing the Falcone family. And then they often wonder, maybe it's good that these criminals are dying, or maybe it's not good because you don't want to be like the villains. So, pretty much to summarize, a lot of things you can do here. I mean, it doesn't really matter what you want to do. Even with my personal preferences, there are so many options. I mean, you could have a show that provides all sorts of entertainment in spite of its target demographic. You can have a show that satirizes the sitcom situations. You can have just something really creative and heartwarming. You can have something deep and philosophical. You can have an epic adventure. You could have a satire. Or maybe you could just have a show that has a creative setup and is witty. Pleasure's all yours. Just go around and do it.